morning sun felt good as we started our hike at Griffith Park. It was a Saturday, perfect for hitting the trails. I was with Michael, Sarah, and Robert, and we were all set to take on one of the less popular paths, aiming for the top. I heard the summit had some amazing views, and we were all excited to see them. The trail began pretty easy, a wide dirt path that gently went uphill. Michael was up front, like always, setting a fast pace. Era was right behind him, her bright blue jacket a splash of color against the dry brush. Robert and I brought up the rear, talking about anything and everything. The air was crisp, and the sky was a clear, light blue. It was one of those days where everything just felt right, where you knew you were in good company doing something fun. We were laughing, joking around, just enjoying the escape from the city. Michael kept cracking jokes about how out of shape we all were, even though he was the one sweating the most. Sarah playfully shoved him whenever he got too obnoxious. Robert, quiet as ever, just kept smiling and nodding along, taking it all in. I remember feeling so light, so alive, with the easy banter and the steady rhythm of our steps. The city, with all its noise and stress, already felt a million miles away. This was what we lived for, these little adventures, these moments of shared calm and joy. After about 20 minutes, the path started to get tougher. It got narrower, the ground got rockier, and the incline got pretty steep in places. We had to watch our footing more, stepping over roots and loose stones. The happy chatter died down a bit as we focused on not stumbling, replaced by the sound of our shoes crunching on the trail and our breathing getting heavier. Even with the challenge, the mood was still good. We were working for it now, but the idea of those panoramic views kept us going. Every time we reached a small clearing, we'd pause for a second, look back at how far we'd come, and then push on. Nobody complained. Nobody really even thought about turning back. That wasn't how we operated. The trees started to get thicker around us, and the trail got even more secluded. It was like the park was slowly closing in, leading us deeper into its quiet parts. The city sounds faded completely, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I remember thinking how nice it was to get away from everything, to be completely surrounded by nature, just the four of us. We pushed through a particularly tight section where bushes brushed against our arms. The path barely looked like a path anymore, more like a deer trail. That's probably why it was less traveled, I thought. More of an adventure. I looked down to tie my shoelace, which had come undone a little while before. I figured I'd wait until we hit a flatter spot. But then I almost tripped, so I decided to just get it done. I bent over, fumbling with the laces, my head down for maybe 10, 15 seconds at most. Michael had been right in front of me, his hiking boots maybe a foot from my own. I could still picture the worn treads on his shoes. Sarah and Robert were behind him, not too far. We were close, all together. When I straightened up, Michael was gone. So were Sarah and Robert. Path in front of me was empty. Just moments before, they had all been right there, a part of the trail, a part of the view. Now there was nothing. It was like they had just vanished into thin air. I blinked, then blinked again, thinking maybe I was seeing things, Or maybe my eyes were just adjusting to the light after looking down. But the path stayed empty. For a second, I thought they were playing a trick on me. Michael was always pulling stuff like that. He loved to mess with people, especially out in the woods. He'd hide behind a tree or dart ahead and then jump out. Yeah, that had to be it. They were trying to spook me. "Michael," I yelled, my voice sounding way too loud in the sudden silence. "Sarah, Robert, this isn't funny." I waited, listening. I expected to hear a laugh or a boo from behind one of the big oak trees, but there was nothing, just the quiet. The wind made a soft sound through the leaves, like a whisper that didn't want to be heard. I called their names again, louder this time, putting more force into it, trying to break through the stillness. My voice cracked a little at the end. "Guys, seriously, where are you?" Still nothing. No response. The quiet felt heavy, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. A strange feeling went through me, something more than just impatience. It was a coldness, even though the sun was still warm on my face. It wasn't physical cold, more like a bad feeling starting to creep up. This wasn't like them. They wouldn't just disappear like this, not all three of them. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Maybe they had gone ahead and I could just call them. I looked at the screen, hoping to see a few bars pop up. Nothing. The signal strength indicator was completely blank, just a tiny X where the bars should have been. No service. Of course. We were deep enough in the park that cell service was usually spotty, but I always counted on getting at least one flickering bar. This time, there was nothing. That's when the panic really started to hit me. It wasn't the playful, "they're messing with me" kind of panic anymore. This was something else. My hands got a little shaky as I put the phone back in my pocket. The silence of the trail, which had felt peaceful just minutes ago, now felt wrong. It felt heavy and unnatural, like it was holding its breath. I looked around again, spinning slowly, trying to spot anything out of place, any sign that they had just stepped off the path for a second. But the trees were just trees, the bushes just bushes, and the trail stretched out in front of me, empty and waiting. I was completely alone. I looked around again, spinning slowly, trying to spot anything out of place, any sign that they had just stepped off the path for a second. But the trees were just trees, the bushes just bushes, and the trail stretched out in front of me, empty and waiting. I was completely alone. I had to go back. That was the only thing that made sense. They had to be behind me somehow. My mind just kept telling me it was a trick, a prank. It had to be. I spun around, practically tripping over my own feet, and started walking back the way we had come, my eyes glued to the path. Every rustle in the leaves made me jump. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. The peaceful quiet of the woods had changed into this loud, oppressive thing, buzzing with every small noise. I called their names again, my voice rough. "Michael, Sarah, Robert." No answer. The trail looked exactly as it had a few minutes ago. The same roots sticking out, the same scattered stones, the same faint marks from our shoes. Nothing was different. Nothing was out of place. It was like they had never even been there. I stopped, my chest tight. This wasn't making any sense. They were physically here. I had seen them. I could almost still feel Michael's boot just a foot in front of me. I told myself to calm down. Maybe they had just ducked off the path for a second, to pee or to check out a plant or something. We were always doing that, but all three of them, at the exact same time, that felt off, really off. I looked around again, squinting into the dense parts of the woods that bordered the trail. There were a lot of trees, a lot of shadows. It was hard to see very far in. The path itself seemed to narrow as it went on, losing some of its definition. It was almost like a game trail now, just a faint hint of where to step. We had talked about that too, how this particular trail was less traveled. It felt pretty clear the reason why now. I started walking forward again, slower this time, my head swiveling from side to side. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. The easy rhythm of before was gone, replaced by careful, deliberate steps. I noticed every detail now: a broken branch, a patch of moss on a rock, the way the light filtered through the leaves in patchy sections. Each detail felt important, like a clue I needed to piece together. "Guys, really, this isn't funny," I rasped, my throat feeling dry. The silence that followed was heavy. It pressed in, making my ears feel full. It wasn't the kind of quiet that meant peace. It was the kind that meant something was wrong. Something was just waiting. The path started curving, making it impossible to see very far ahead. It was like a tunnel made of trees and tangled bushes. I had to push through some branches that brushed against my face, leaving tiny scratches on my cheeks. This wasn't the way we had come in, I was sure of it. Or if it was, it felt completely different now. Every tree looked the same. Every turn seemed identical. I pushed away the creeping feeling that I was lost. I had to focus. I had to find them. I kept calling out their names, my voice getting louder, more desperate. It cracked and wavered. Michael, Sarah, Robert. The only response was the sound of my own anxious breathing and the crunch of my shoes on the dirt. The air was getting cooler here, or maybe it was just my own body reacting. A cold feeling spread through my chest, making my skin feel tight. This wasn't a prank. The realization hit me suddenly, like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a game. Something was actually wrong. I pressed on, my legs moving almost on their own. I was walking faster now, somewhere between a quick walk and a stumbling run. Each step felt heavy, like I was moving through thick mud. The woods got even denser. The trees were closer together, their branches weaving overhead like a tight roof. It was darker in here, even though it was still daytime. I could barely make out the path now. It had narrowed so much it was almost gone, just a faint imprint in the dirt. And then I saw it. Half hidden by a large, rough rock, something dark broke up the natural flow of the ground. It was a shape, too big for just a shadow, too defined for a random pile of leaves. My feet froze, my breath hitched. It was a backpack, Michael's backpack. I knew it instantly. The same dull green color, the same worn patch on the top flap. My eyes tracked from the backpack to the ground next to it. And there he was, Michael. He was lying face down, his body a crumpled form against the dirt. His arms were tucked in, almost like he had fallen forward. The familiar green of his hiking shirt was there, but it was ruined. A dark, spreading stain covered most of his back, soaking into the fabric. It looked black, but in the dim light, I knew what it was. It had to be blood. I stumbled forward, my legs suddenly shaky, like they weren't quite working right. One moment I was standing there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and the next, I was almost falling onto my knees next to him. "Michael," I whispered, the sound barely audible. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched his shoulder. His shirt was damp, cold, not just cool from the air, but like ice. I gave him a gentle shake. "Michael, hey, come on, wake up." His body didn't move. No flinch, no rustle of clothes, no soft groan, nothing. He was completely still, completely unresponsive. I squeezed his shoulder harder, trying to get some kind of reaction, but there was nothing. He felt heavy, solid, but lifeless. I pulled my hand back slowly, my fingers feeling numb. My eyes scanned his body again, trying to find anything that would explain it away, make it less real. But the dark stain on his back was too wide, too dark. His skin looked a strange, pale color at the edges of his shirt, and his body was angled in a way that just wasn't natural. Panic hit me like a physical wave, colder and sharper than anything I had felt before. My mind raced, jumping from one terrible thought to the next, too fast to properly grab onto any of them. He's dead. Michael is dead. The words crashed through my head over and over, making no sense at all. How? What happened? His backpack was right there, like he had just set it down. But the stain in my stomach did a slow roll, and I leaned back, scrambling away from him a little. My hands went to my head, my fingers digging into my hair. This was real. This was actually happening. Michael was gone. And if Michael was gone, a cold dread spread through me, making my whole body feel stiff. Sarah, Robert, where were they? Were they like this too? The previous fear, thinking they were lost or playing a trick, felt childish now. This was something else entirely, something horrible, something violent. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn around and sprint back the way I came, to get out of this place, to get as far away from Michael and whatever had done this. But then the other thought, just as strong, crushed it. Sarah, Robert, I couldn't just leave them. I couldn't. Not after this. Something awful was happening out here, and they were still missing. I had to find them. I had to know. I stood there, paralyzed by a mix of fear and confusion, looking down at Michael's body. The horrible realization that this wasn't just a simple turn in the trail or a few friends getting lost completely gripped me. This was something truly terrible, and I was right in the middle of it. I stood there, paralyzed by a mix of fear and confusion, looking down at Michael's body. The horrible realization that this wasn't just a simple turn in the trail or a few friends getting lost completely gripped me. This was something truly terrible, and I was right in the middle of it. I forced myself to move, my legs feeling stiff and awkward, like they didn't quite belong to me anymore. Every part of me screamed to run, to sprint back the way I came, and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But the thought of Sarah and Robert, still out there, possibly like Michael, stopped me cold. I couldn't leave them. Not yet. I just couldn't. My mind was a blur of fear and questions. How had this happened? Who could have done something like this? Had they been ambushed? And why was I still here? Why was I spared? The woods, which had felt peaceful and welcoming just an hour ago, now felt sinister, like a trap closing in around me. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I pushed myself away from Michael, turning my back on his still form, even though a part of me wanted to just sit there to mourn, to scream at the unfairness of it all. But there wasn't time for that. I had to find Sarah and Robert. I had to. It was the only thing I could do. I didn't try to go back to the main trail. That felt wrong, like retracing steps for a nightmare. Instead, I picked a faint game path that branched off to the right, downhill. It was barely visible, just a subtle flattening of the brush, maybe a few snapped twigs. It looked like it went into a deeper, more wooded part of the park, away from the path we'd taken. My mind was just grasping at anything, hoping it would circle back to some other part of the park, maybe even a road, somewhere I could find help. The terrain immediately got worse. The ground under my feet was loose dirt, and there were sharp rocks poking up everywhere. It was steep, much steeper than the main trail. I had to step carefully, digging the sides of my shoes into the loose earth to keep from sliding. My movements were clumsy, hurried. I felt like I was stumbling more than walking, my body shaking with a mix of leftover shock and fresh adrenaline. Trees grew closer together here, their branches interlaced, forming a roof that blocked most of the light. It was dim and cool, and the air felt thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. I kept my eyes peeled, scanning the ground in front of me, then sweeping my gaze from side to side into the dense brush. I was looking for anything, a bright piece of clothing, a misplaced backpack, any sign of them. All I saw were more trees, more thickets, more shadows. The silence here was even deeper than before, broken only by my ragged breathing and the occasional crunch of my shoes. It was the kind of silence that hummed around you, like a sound itself, making you think you could hear your own blood moving. I kept calling their names, but my voice was thin, almost swallowed by the quiet. Sarah, Robert. It sounded muffled, desperate. There was no echo, just the flat absorption of sound by the thick woods. The slope got even steeper, and I could hear the faint sound of running water somewhere below, a trickle, like a small creek. I pushed through a particularly dense patch of thorny bushes, thorns snagging on my pants and shirt. I didn't care. I just needed to keep moving. I slid down a short embankment, maybe 6 or 7 feet, kicking up a cloud of dust and loose stones. I landed hard near the bottom, my ankle twisting slightly, but I barely registered the pain. I was in a dry creek bed now, or what looked like one during the warm months. The ground was rocky and uneven, covered in smooth, water-worn stones and larger, rougher rocks. The sound of water was clearer here, a soft gurgle coming from around a bend. Overgrown bushes, thick and tangled, lined both sides of the creek bed. And then I saw her. Tangled in a thicket of those overgrown bushes, half hidden by their coarse branches, was Sarah. My stomach dropped even further, if that was even possible. She was lying on her side, half buried in the leaves and dirt, her bright blue jacket a stark contrast against the dull brown and green of the undergrowth. Her arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, bent back behind her in a way that made me feel sick just looking at it. Her eyes were open, wide, and staring blankly upwards, unblinking. There was no light in them, no recognition, just a vacant glassiness that told me everything. She wasn't moving, not even a breath, not a tremble. She just lay there, lifeless, her face pale. My legs went out from under me, and I dropped to my knees beside her, the rocky ground digging into my skin. It didn't matter. My vision got blurry, and a hot, painful tear rolled down my cheek. This wasn't real. It couldn't be, not Sarah. Always so full of life, always laughing, always pushing us forward. Now, just still. Her phone was clutched tightly in her hand, her fingers curled around it. The screen was black, completely dark, just like mine had been. It was like she had been holding on to it, maybe trying to call for help, right up until the very end. I reached out, my hand shaking uncontrollably, and hovered it over her arm. I knew it was pointless. I knew what I would find, or rather, what I wouldn't find. But I had to. I pressed my fingers against the inside of her wrist, searching for a pulse, anything, nothing, just cold, still skin. It was definite. She was gone, too. A wave of nausea washed over me, raw and overwhelming. I leaned back slightly, pulling my hand away from her, my fingers still tingling from the coldness of her skin. The silence in the creek bed felt deafening now. It amplified my terror, making the quiet feel like a roaring tide in my ears. I just sat there for a minute, or maybe it was longer, just staring at her, trying to process the horrifying reality of it. 2 of them, both gone. My eyes swept over the ground around her, my mind still trying to grasp what had happened here. And then I saw it, faint, almost imperceptible. A drag mark in the dirt, leading from where Sarah lay. It wasn't just a random scratch, it was a line, maybe a foot wide, a disturbed path in the loose soil, like something heavy had been pulled. It went away from her body, heading towards a dark opening under a collapsed tree further down the creek bed. The opening looked like a small cave entrance, just a shadowed crevice. The mark suggested someone or something had moved her. The thought sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just a fall. Michael, then Sarah. This was deliberate. And that meant the person who did this, whatever it was still out here, maybe even watching me right now. I knelt there in the quiet creek bed, staring at the faint drag mark by Sarah's body. It led straight to that dark opening under the fallen tree, barely noticeable unless you were actively looking for something out of place. My mind kept screaming at me, "Don't go in there. Just run away. Get out." But a horrifying curiosity, or maybe just a desperate need to know, pulled me forward. Robert was still out there. I had to find him. Getting up from the rocky ground was hard. My knees felt wobbly, and my whole body ached. I got to my feet, my eyes fixed on the crevice. It wasn't a proper cave, not really. More like a deep hole where the roots of the collapsed tree had ripped up the earth, leaving a shadowed space underneath. It looked small, barely big enough for a person to squeeze into. The drag mark definitely went inside, disappearing into the blackness. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. The air here felt different, heavier, colder. It was like the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to make a move. Each step felt like wading through thick mud. The ground by the cave entrance was soft, damp earth, with a few dead leaves scattered around. Everything was quiet, except for the faint trickle of water from deeper, within the creek bed. As I got closer, the opening looked even more intimidating. It was just a gaping mouth, framed by twisted roots and dark soil. There was no light inside, just an inky blackness that seemed to suck in whatever faint sunlight might be trying to get in. I could feel the cold radiating from it, a damp chill that was different from the general cold dread that had settled over me. It was a physical cold, like walking into a cellar on a hot day. I hesitated right at the brink, my shoes just inches from the edge of the opening. My shoulders felt tense, pulled tight. I could feel my jaw clenching. Every single nerve ending was buzzing, warning me to back off. This was it, wasn't it? The end of the line. The place where I would either find Robert or find something much worse. I leaned down, squinting into the gloom. My eyes weren't adjusting well. It was just too dark. I couldn't make out anything beyond the immediate entrance. It smelled like damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sour. A smell I couldn't quite place, but instantly disliked. It was a small space. I could tell that much just from the way the darkness closed in almost immediately. I reached out a trembling hand, gripping a rough root that hung down by the opening, and slowly, carefully, I pulled myself forward. I had to bend low, almost crawl, to get inside. The ground was uneven, rocky, and slippery with dampness. My shoes scraped against the rough earth. The darkness swallowed me whole as I pushed my head and shoulders through the narrow opening. Once I was fully inside, the silence became absolute. It was deafening. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, which seemed incredibly loud in the enclosed space. My eyes slowly started to adjust, helped by a faint, ghostly illumination that came from somewhere above. I looked up and saw a few thin cracks and holes in the rock ceiling, letting in slivers of what little light managed to get through the dense tree cover outside. It was just enough to make out vague shapes. It was a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a low ceiling. The walls were rough, natural rock, and the floor was just dirt and scattered stones. It felt damp, the air thick and heavy. A slight draft moved through, making the coldness even more noticeable. There wasn't much in the chamber, just the rough walls and floor, and then across from me, slumped against the far wall, Robert. My stomach flipped again, a violent lurch that made me gag. He was sitting with his back pressed against the rock, his knees pulled up slightly. He wasn't crumpled like Michael, or partly hidden like Sarah. He was just there, undisturbed in a way, if you didn't count the absolute stillness. I stumbled forward, moving slowly, my eyes locked on him. He was wearing his usual blue-collared shirt, the one he wore on all our hikes, mostly because it was lightweight. It seemed so normal, so Robert asterisk, but his face was different. It was pale, that awful, almost grayish white that I had seen on Michael and Sarah. And his eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, vacant and unseeing. His mouth was open too, twisted in a silent scream. It was like he had been caught in the middle of a soundless cry, just as everything stopped. There were no obvious wounds, no dark stains on his shirt, nothing like what I'd seen on Michael. He just looked like he had been frozen in a moment of sheer terror. I dropped to my knees a few feet from him, not wanting to get any closer, but unable to just leave him. I could barely breathe. The air in the cave felt thin, impossible to get enough of. I just knelt there, looking at his face, at that silent scream. It was worse than the blood, worse than the twisted arm. It was the pure, raw horror etched onto his features. I reached out, my hand shaking, unsure what I was even trying to do. Maybe just to confirm he was real, that this wasn't some horrible hallucination. My fingers hovered close to his collar, just above his shoulder. My eyes zeroed in, and then I stopped. It was there, just barely visible against his pale skin, partly hidden by the collar of his shirt. A thin, dark line. Not a cut, not a bruise, but a mark. A straight, dark line that went all the way around his neck, just below his jawline. It was chillingly precise, almost too neat, like someone had drawn it there with a thin, dark pencil. It was a ligature mark, the kind of mark you get when something tight is wrapped around your neck, something that stops you from breathing. A cold dread spread through me, so intense it made my whole body feel like it was vibrating. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random event. This was deliberate. Robert had been strangled, choked. Michael had been stabbed. Sarah, I hadn't seen the exact cause, but that twisted arm, those staring eyes, and that drag mark. This wasn't some animal, this wasn't a fall. This was a person. Someone had done this, and they were still out here, in these woods, maybe even close by, maybe even watching me right now, hidden in the shadows, waiting for me to make a move. The thought sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through me. My skin felt like it was crawling. My breath hitched in my throat. I scrambled back, away from Robert, away from the wall, until my back hit the opposite side of the small chamber. My legs felt weak, useless. I had to get out. I had to. The urgent need to escape, to run, to get as far away from this place and its horrors as possible, completely consumed me now. I pushed myself up, my hands scraping against the rough rock, desperate to get back to the small opening, back to whatever confused, terrifying world was outside this nightmare cave. My back slammed into the rock of the small cave, the cold seeping through my shirt. Robert's eyes, fixed in that silent scream, seemed to burn into me. Every logical thought screamed at me to get out, to run, to just disappear. The fear of what was still out there, the person who had done this, dwarfed everything else. I pushed up from the floor, my hands sliding against the damp, rough stone, desperate to get back to the small opening. I had to bend almost double again to squeeze through the narrow mouth of the cave. My shirt snagged on a twisted root, but I didn't care. I pulled hard, ripping free, and tumbled out onto the damp earth of the creek bed. My hands landed in the soft, dark soil, and I pushed up fast, scrambling to my feet. The sudden blast of the outside air, even with its heavy, damp smell, felt like a jolt, a desperate gulp after being underwater for too long. I didn't bother looking back at the cave entrance or at Sarah's body still tangled in the bushes. My eyes darted around, searching the thick woods lining the creek bed. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to hold something just out of sight. The rustle of leaves, the distant snap of a twig, they all sounded like footsteps, like someone moving closer, watching me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of things, trying to find an escape. I thought of every survival movie, every horror story I'd ever heard. The killer had to be still here, close by, maybe even tracking me. The thought sent a jolt of ice through my chest. I couldn't stay in the creek bed. It felt too exposed, too open. I needed cover, something to put between me and whatever was out there. I didn't even consider trying to get back to the main trail, not after everything that had happened. That path felt like a death trap now, leading straight back to the horrors I had just left. My only chance was to go the other way, deeper into the less known parts of the park, hoping to somehow find my way out. I aimed for what looked like the steepest descent, figuring it would get me away faster. This meant crashing straight through the brush, off any discernible path. The overgrown bushes grabbed at my clothes, their branches whipping against my face and arms. Thorns scraped against my skin, pulling at my pants and shirt. I moved through it all like a wild animal, pushing, pulling, and tearing my way forward. My legs burned with the effort, my lungs aching with every ragged breath. The ground under my feet was treacherous. It sloped down sharply, covered in loose dirt and hidden roots. I tripped more times than I could count, catching myself just before I fell completely. Each stumble sent a jolt of pain up my legs, but I barely registered it. All I cared about was putting as much distance as possible between me and that cave, between me and the bodies of my friends. The woods here were incredibly dense. The trees were packed and tight, so close their branches tangled together, forming a dark, heavy roof overhead. Only slivers of light managed to break through, making the forest floor dim and shadowy, even in what I assumed was the middle of the day. The air was thick, still, and humid, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. It felt ancient, like no one had walked through here in years. I kept calling out, my voice raw and hoarse, but it was just a reflex. Hello, is anyone out here? Each word sounded weak, swallowed immediately by the oppressive silence of the woods. There was no one to answer, no one to help. Just me, the sounds of my own desperate struggle, and the ever-present, terrifying quiet that told me I was alone. I was moving fast, my arms pumping, my legs pushing, but it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Every bush I fought through, every patch of thicket I pushed past, just revealed more of the same. More trees, more shadows, more silence. The burning in my legs grew more intense, a deep ache that spread from my thighs down to my calves. My lungs felt like they were on fire, desperate for more air than I could pull in. I started to get disoriented. Which way was I going? Was I just going in circles? The panic started to really set in then. A cold, creeping certainty that I was utterly lost, trapped in this endless, terrifying green maze. I forced myself to stop, pressing my hands against my knees, trying to get my breathing under control. It was erratic, shallow, and fast, but I needed to try and think. I shut my eyes for a second, then opened them again, trying to refocus. I had to look for something, anything familiar, something that would give me a direction. A shift in the tree line, a different kind of ground cover, anything. I took a few deep, deliberate breaths, forcing the air into my aching lungs. My legs still burned, but the immediate, crushing fear of being totally lost started to subside slightly, replaced by a desperate, but more focused, determination. I looked up through the dense branches, trying to catch a glimpse of the sun, anything to tell me which way was east or west. It was hard to tell, but I thought I saw a slightly brighter patch to my right, hinting at a more open area. It was a gamble, but I had to take it. I started moving again, angling myself towards that faint glimmer of light. The terrain was still challenging, but I pushed through it with a renewed sense of purpose. I stumbled more times. Once, my foot caught on a hidden root, and I went down hard, landing on my hands and knees in the dirt. I scraped my palm on a sharp rock, a line of pain stinging across my skin. But I was up again in a second, not even looking at the blood starting to well up. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burned, and my throat was raw from the dry air and my desperate gasps. But then, through the dense foliage, I saw it again. Not just a glimmer, but a stronger, steadier patch of light. It was unmistakable this time. And then, a different kind of glint. Not water, not leaves, but something straight and hard. Asphalt. A wave of pure, unfiltered relief washed over me, so sudden and strong it almost buckled my knees again. I pushed through the last few thorny bushes with a burst of strength I didn't know I had. Branches slapped against my face, but I didn't feel them. I burst out of the tree line, out of the suffocating darkness of the woods, and onto a narrow, paved service road. The sunlight, warm and bright, hit me like a physical force. I stumbled forward a few steps, my legs giving out completely, and collapsed onto the warm asphalt. I lay there for a moment, my face pressed against the rough, sun-baked pavement, my chest heaving, trying to pull in as much air as I possibly could. The smell of hot asphalt and dust filled my nostrils, so incredibly real, so different from the earthy, decaying smell of the woods. I rolled onto my back, looking up at the clear blue sky, tears welling up in my eyes. I was out. I was finally out of that place. The relief was overwhelming, almost paralyzing. My body trembled uncontrollably, not from cold, but from the massive adrenaline dump, the complete exhaustion, and the lingering terror. After a few long, shaky breaths, I managed to push myself up into a sitting position. My hands were scraped and dirty, my clothes torn, my hair matted with sweat and leaves. I looked like I had just crawled out of a grave. Maybe I had. I reached into my pocket, my fingers fumbling, and pulled out my phone. It felt like another lifetime ago that I had checked it back on the trail when it had been completely dead. Now, as I turned it over, the screen flickered to life. And there it was, a single bar of signal, faint, but it was there. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I hit the emergency number, my finger slipping a few times on the screen before it finally connected. It rang once, twice, and then a calm, professional voice came through the speaker. 911, what's your emergency? The words felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the nightmare, grounding me. But when I tried to speak, my voice caught in my throat. It was hoarse, rough, barely a whisper. Hello, sir, are you there? The voice asked, a slight edge of concern now. I swallowed hard, forcing air into my lungs. Yes, yes, I'm in the park. My friends, they're dead. All of them. Something happened. The words tumbled out, broken and incoherent. I was hysterical, I knew it, but I couldn't help it. The horror of what I had seen, what I had barely escaped, was too much. Sir, where exactly are you? Can you tell me your location? I looked around frantically, desperate to give them something, anything. I saw a small green sign nailed to a tree at the edge of the service road, covered in faded writing. I strained my eyes, trying to make out the letters. It's the Oakwood Park. I'm on a service road. I just came out of the woods. I tried to point back towards the daunting tree line, the dark mass of forest from which I had just emerged. The trees looked even more ominous from the safety of the road, a dark, unbroken wall of green. My friends' bodies were in there, somewhere within its depths. Michael, Sarah, Robert, all of them gone. And I was the only one left, the only one who knew. My voice was still raw, cracking, as I tried to explain what had happened, pointing back into the dark mouth of the woods. It felt like only seconds passed before the first car lights appeared on the service road, cutting through the dimness of the forest. 2 park rangers came first, their uniforms a stark contrast to the green and brown of the trees. Then, more flashing red and blue lights, police cars, so many of them. I barely registered their questions at first. My words tumbled out, probably making no sense, just a jumble of dead, friends, cave, and murder. All I could do was flail my arm towards the daunting tree line, the silent, green wall that held so much terror. I wanted them to understand, to see what I had seen, but the words just wouldn't come out right. A calm-looking officer, a woman with kind eyes, knelt down beside me. She spoke softly, asking me to take a deep breath, to try and slow down. She handed me a bottle of water, and I took a long, desperate gulp. The coolness soothed my raw throat a little, making it easier to talk. I managed to tell them about Michael, then Sarah, then Robert. I told them about the creek, the drag mark, the crevice, everything. The police quickly roped off the whole area, setting up yellow tape that looked so out of place against the natural forest. A search and rescue team arrived not long after, a group of serious-faced people with dogs and specialized gear. I went with them, guiding them through the thick brush, back down the steep slope I had just escaped from. Each step felt like a nightmare replay, my body remembering the terror. We found Michael first, just where I had left him. His body was still unnaturally sprawled, his face frozen in that shocked gasp. The search team grimaced, and I heard quiet whispers as they examined him. One of them, a woman with tight braids, looked at me, her eyes full of something like pity, maybe horror. I just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that yes, this was real. This was what I had found. The walk to Sarah felt even longer. Every tree, every bush looked the same. My mind kept trying to trick me, to tell me I was going the wrong way, that maybe none of this had ever happened. But then the creek bed appeared, and my stomach flipped. I pointed to the tangled roots, to the spot where I had found her. They moved carefully, respectfully, and there she was. Still silent, her arm twisted. They confirmed the drag mark I'd seen, following it to the dark opening under the fallen tree. That was the hardest part, going back into that cave. Even with the search team and all their lights, the air felt just as thick, just as cold. I pointed to Robert's body, slumped against the far wall like he was waiting for us. The silence in that small space was crushing, even with the crackle of their radios. They took pictures, examined him, and I heard them talk about the ligature mark, confirming what I already knew. They didn't stay long in the cave. They brought Robert out, covering him with a white sheet. They did the same for Sarah and Michael. It was hard to watch, seeing them wrapped up like that, like packages. It took all three of them out, and all three were gone from my sight. This was it. There was nothing more I could do out there. We went back to the service road, and I overheard bits and pieces of what the forensic people were saying. Words like blunt force trauma for Michael, asphyxiation for Robert, and then something about forceful restraint and trauma consistent with being dragged for Sarah. It all pointed to the same thing, a pattern. It wasn't random, not a different killer for each. They were all connected, all part of the same terrible act. The initial thoughts of a singular, malicious killer, just like I had thought, were quickly becoming the truth. From the park, they took me to the LAPD Wilshire Community Police Station. The police station was nothing like the woods. It was bright, noisy, full of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. They gave me a quiet room, and a detective, a kind-faced man named Miller, sat across from me. He had a notepad and a pen, but he mostly just listened. I talked for hours. I started from the beginning, from the cheerful start of our hike, the jokes we shared, the point when I turned around and they were gone. I described finding Michael, the blood, the twisted knife. Then Sarah, the fear, the drag mark, the silence. And finally Robert, the cave, the silent scream on his face, the dark line on his neck. Every moment, every feeling, every terrible detail. I didn't hold anything back. It was like a dam breaking, all the terror and grief pouring out in a torrent of words. Detective Miller listened, interjecting only occasionally with a question to clarify. He asked me about anyone we might have seen on the trail, anyone who might have followed us. I racked my brain, but nothing came to me. We hadn't seen anyone else, not really. Just the usual early morning hikers at the start, far away from where this had happened. When I finished, my voice was completely gone. I felt utterly drained, empty. Detective Miller looked at me across the table. He told me they had confirmed it, all three of them. Michael, Sarah, Robert, all murdered. An investigation was open, a task force assembled. I was important, he said, the sole survivor, the primary witness. I was the only one who knew what had happened in those woods. They helped me arrange transportation back to my apartment. I didn't have the energy to drive my car, which was still back at the park's main lot. A police officer drove me, keeping up a quiet stream of conversation, trying to distract me. But my mind kept going back to the bodies, to the faces of my friends. Getting back to my apartment felt strange. It was exactly as I had left it that morning, full of light and the promise of a good day. But everything had changed. The air felt heavy, tainted by what I had seen. I wandered from room to room, touching things, trying to make them feel real again. My hiking boots, still muddy, sat by the door, a grim reminder. I threw them in the trash. I couldn't look at them. The days that followed were a blur. Calls from the police, calls from family, calls from reporters trying to get a statement. I didn't answer most of them. I just existed. I couldn't sleep without seeing their faces when I closed my eyes. Michael's shock, Sarah's twisted arm, Robert's silent scream. The scent of damp earth, of something metallic and sour, seemed to stick to me even after showering. It was always there, a phantom smell that made me gag. The police kept in touch. They had no leads, no suspects. No one else had been reported missing from the park. It was like the killer had just appeared, struck, and vanished without a trace. The case remained open, an unsolved mystery floating over me like a dark storm cloud. I tried to go back to work, to my life, but it was impossible. Every person I saw on the street, every stranger, felt like a potential threat. Every shadow, every sound made me jump. I would never forget. The horror of that day was etched into my mind, a permanent scar. My friends were gone, their lives cut short in such a violent, senseless way. And the person responsible, the malicious, terrifying killer, was still out there, somewhere free. That thought, more than anything, haunted me. It followed me through every waking hour, a chilling, inescapable truth.